Good evening, everyone. I'm John OLoughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called Macduff Lives. And tonight we're getting back into history. We've been reading mostly in the 11 a.m. Eastern Time show here on Macduff Lives, the book How the Nation Was Won by H. Graham Lowry. And I actually have not skipped a single word of this book. I'm up to page 297. And why am I doing this, you might ask? And the reason is because we need to know this story, the real story of the struggle for a republic that had begun in England and in Europe, and the people that wanted to have a republic are now trying to preserve the rights that they gained under the charters when the states were first formed, or the colonies, excuse me, the provinces, the colonies. And under those charters, there was a lot of room for the government, the colonial people, to say, hey, we have a right of self-government here. And we're going to do our own taxation, and we're going to let our own government decide what nations we'll trade with. So we're not going to obey the British system of only trading with Britain if you're a colony. And that was the big monetary issue in Massachusetts and New England that drove, by the time of the restoration of Charles II, the Republicans had a pretty good run. But then when you have royal authority coming back in and just saying, well, I'm now going to govern from the top down, appoint a royal governor, and we've talked about a number of those who were quite unsuccessful and really just people who were there to hold the office and have a good time in many extraordinary ways that we've heard about. So this is the oligarchs of the back courts of the palaces of London, the oligarchs that are basically representing what we've identified as the Venetian party, meaning the finances coming from, ultimately from Venice, but by way of Amsterdam with the glorious revolution of William III and his wife, Queen Mary. So that all has been that all happened back in the 1688, 1690s. Now we're up to 1715, 16, and 17, and we are looking at the United States, or the future United States, and seeing basically all of the settlements are huddled along the rivers, the tidal rivers, so that the big ships, trading ships, can come there and pick up crops, whether it's tobacco or indigo or corn or rice or whatever they're growing. But the point is that everybody's concentrated in the area of some port. And Alexander Spotswood, the governor of Virginia in our last chapter, has been mounting expeditions out to get across the Blue Ridge Mountains, found a gap through the mountains, and proposed a expedition up to Lake Erie to start a fort there in order to keep the route open across the mountains and keep the Iroquois under control. The Iroquois, a huge band of Indians that stretched all the way from northern New York state all the way down into Maryland, in the form of the Susquehannocks. Pardon me a second. Hey, Deborah Johnson, good to have you here tonight. And once again, today I spent many hours going through all the archives here at the library and archives that are kind of under construction for the purpose of culling the exact things I need to to write my book about my dad, a bit of a biography that I do plan to have done by the end of May. And so that's why I'm cutting down on my number of shows every week, so I can just let my mind work on this big project. And, it's obviously an emotional thing for me too. So I have to sometimes do baby steps, but keep moving forward. So in Virginia, the speculators, the people who would come and get large land grants in exchange for some service to the king, such as William Byrd, one of the early plantation owners, have gotten together, and under the new king, King George, George I of Hanover, the German king, who was pretty much under the control of the oligarchs. So now we're back to those oligarchical rulers centered around the Duke of Marlborough and the Churchill family. And okay, so it's now in Virginia, the oligarchical faction is led by William Byrd, and we can pick up there. So William Byrd finally has the opportunity to charge Alexander Spotswood with a crime, with the depriving us of our ancient rights and privileges and many hardships which he daily exercises upon your majesty's subjects of the colony. Will your majesty please graciously be pleased to receive some particulars from the Honorable William Byrd, Esquire, who would like to come and appear. And then he offers to show all the good reasons that the king should remove Alexander Spotswood from being the governor. And now I'll pick up reading on page 298. The plotters' attempted parliamentary coup against Spotswood blew up in their faces. Enough of his supporters were rallied to reduce the bill of particulars against the governor to an impotent gesture. 8 of the 14 charges were voted down outright, including such absurdities as he hath entirely neglected the militia. Only 2 of the original complaints passed, dealing with disputes over the burgesses' salaries and expenditures for the governor's residence. 3 more were amended into insignificant challenges to Spotswood's interpretations of minor laws and royal directives, and in the remaining leading instruction to Byrd, the language calling for Spotswood's removal was stricken. The degenerate William Byrd, waiting in London for news of his minion's expected success, would have to confront a new reality. Through Spotswood's leadership, a Republican movement had taken hold in Virginia. More than the governor now stood. Hang on a second. There. More than the governor now stood in the way of the feudal empire he sought. In a losing effort, Byrd also had publicly sacrificed all of his agents, both in the council and in the House. Spotswood did not hesitate to press this advantage. When he prorogued the assembly on December 1st, he directed his remarks at the burgesses who had conspired with Byrd. Quote, "Far from being disturbed at your violent impeachments," he declared, "I take this to be a happy crisis when the country will be no longer imposed upon by malicious whisperers, clandestine informers, and anonymous libelers of government." Spotswood's own supporters could now meet the enemy on an open field. 21 of Virginia's 25 counties passed resolutions condemning the general and hasty charges against the governor. The colony's clergymen meeting in convention commended him for his just and wise government. The grand jury lodged a formal protest against the rump proceedings in the House. Of the plotters among the Burgesses, Spotswood noted later, scarce one of them would ever be chosen Burgess again, were it not for the awe that the discontented councillors carry. Spotswood's defeat of Byrd's faction in the House turned the political calculations of London's oddsmakers into so much rubbish. The governor's support among the Virginia population also left the Board of Trade with no pretext to act on the remaining shreds of the Burgesses' address to the king. His Majesty's government, however, was determined to delay action as long as possible on the crucial issue of the Virginia Council. Without the council's consent, Spotswood could not negotiate a treaty with the Iroquois to open the way for settlements beyond the Blue Ridge. Byrd controlled 8 seats on the 12-man body, but if the Board of Trade granted Orkney's request to replace 4 of them with supporters of Spotswood, the situation would be reversed. In the meantime, the governor of Virginia was forced to operate under the council's absurd restriction that no treaty could be proposed to the Iroquois until after they had attacked Virginia. Spotswood's patience was wearing thin, but there was no response from the Board of Trade on the council issue through the entirety of 1719. It was a year of more intrigue than usual at the court of King George. The Venetian parties, Bank of England and East India Company, had just taken over the South Sea Company and were preparing a blowout of the British economy. Robert Harley's South Seas Act of 1711 for restoring the nation's credit had been turned by the junto Whigs into an insider's orgy of speculation, from which Robert Walpole would soon emerge as the ruler of Britain for the next 2 decades. Britain had also declared war with Spain, and from Dublin, Jonathan Swift again detected the foul odor of his enemies run amok. In the spring of 1719, Swift's old friend, Robert Hunter, in communications with Spotswood and Keith, decided to make the difficult voyage to London to assess the political situation at first hand. His departure was delayed by sudden displays of warlike intentions among the Iroquois tribes, ultimately aimed at Virginia. Given the growing influence of the Jesuits within the 5 nations, this development was hardly coincidental. With the threat of impending attack, Spotswood decided not to convene the House of Burgesses and rarely called a meeting of the council. When he did, it was to confront their idiotic policy of no peace without war. He met with them on May 28th to report that the Senecas, one of the Iroquois 5 nations, had raided a plantation in Essex County, not 50 miles north of Williamsburg, and that 350 more of them were, quote, encamped at the foot of the Great Mountains. With bitter irony, Spotswood informed the councilors he had taken no action because of their resolution to do nothing until the Iroquois should commit actual hostilities on the inhabitants of this colony. And he did not know whether the gentlemen who were of that opinion then would judge the plundering of a house such an act of hostility. He next summoned the council on June 26 to inform them of petitions from the outlying inhabitants of nearby New Kent and Henrico counties, representing, quote, the great and imminent danger they apprehended themselves exposed to by the frequent marches of the northern Indians through their plantations, and, quote, praying such measures may be taken as may protect them in their lives and estates. The Iroquois invasions of these counties threatened to isolate the capital at Williamsburg, located on the peninsula between the York and James rivers. Spotswood also read a letter from Pennsylvania Governor William Keith, quote, giving an account that a great body of the said northern Indians are marched away towards Virginia, privately declaring that they intend to try the strength of the English at the fort of Christiana. The combined assault could cut off and destroy the Saponi Indians, the only significant tribe still allied with Virginia. All of these moves by the Iroquois violated the preliminary articles of agreement negotiated by Spotswood, Keith, and Hunter, by which they would not cross the Potomac or the Blue Ridge. But, quote, the obstinacy of Virginia, as Spotswood had warned regarding Byrd's faction on the council, had given the Jesuits a free hand. Keith's letter to Spotswood also reported that the Cayugas of western New York, another tribe of the Five Nations, for their people had, quote, plainly declared that they expected a free recourse for their people through the English plantations while they were making war on their enemies. After presenting this entire intelligence picture, Governor Spotswood, quote, was pleased to ask the advice of the council what measures, excuse me a second. Oh, no problem. Tell you what, let me get a drink of water and we'll get back to the book. Governor Spotswood was pleased to ask the advice of the council what measures they judged proper to be taken for the protection of the inhabitants of this colony, seeing that the council hath heretofore declined entering upon any terms with these Indians until actual hostilities should be committed. Spotswood was fully aware of the potential trap before him if he took the bait of the Iroquois incursions and responded militarily on his own authority. Byrd's henchmen might charge him with initiating an Indian war, which could devastate the colonies from New England to the Carolinas. Beyond the carnage, such an outcome might entirely close the door to the West. Spotswood coolly reminded the council that the last assembly had done nothing to compensate for the safeguards lost by the king's veto of the Indian Act. He then declared that if this board can take a more effectual course for the defense of the country than what has hitherto proposed, he shall readily follow their advice. He then placed the burden of the Iroquois threat upon his enemies on the council, and they choked accordingly while considering the least measures they dared recommend. In the event of an attack on Fort Christiana, the council advised that the governor order out the militia of the adjacent counties to relieve that place and to repel the said Indians by force. Incursions by the Iroquois on their way to the southward should be met by armed militia under orders not to fight unless attacked. The Indians should be informed in a friendly manner that they were not to pass through Virginia's settlements, but if they refused to comply, the commanding officer should immediately notify the governor, quote, of the route the said Indians intended to take. The governor should also order Virginia's tribes to no longer allow any of their Indians to be employed as guides to the northern Indians. To this blueprint for defeat, the council added a final recommendation that Spotswood wrote to Governor Hunter, urging him to, quote, use his authority and interest to restrain the Five Nations under his government from passing through the inhabitants of this colony. This last advice from Byrd's cronies on the council strongly suggested their desire to tie down Hunter as well, who was about to sail for England. Spotswood shot back that he had already written in the most pressing terms he could to the governor of New York on that subject and could add nothing more to prevent those dangers which apparently threaten our frontiers by the marches of the Five Nations. On June 24, 1719, just 2 days before Spotswood's confrontation with Byrd's allies in the Virginia Council, Robert Hunter addressed a joint session of the New York legislature. He was 52 years old, but recently stricken with severe arthritis. His wife had died in 1716 at the age of 30, leaving him with 4 children. He announced that in consideration of his health and his little family, as well as private affairs on the other side, he was returning to England. Hunter emphasized that he held a firm resolution to return again, but if he could not, he pledged to be watchful and industrious to promote the interest and welfare of this country, of which I account myself a countryman. He was never again to set foot in New York, but he could be proud of his political legacy. Upon his arrival, deliberative functions of provincial government had reassembled a clogged sewer, full of factional waste piled up since the defeat of Leisler's rebellion against Francis Nicholson, following the Andros Rebellion in Massachusetts. The leaders of the Anglican clergy operated simply as agents of Lord Cornbury and had worked to remove Hunter as an enemy of the church. Hunter had been protected at first by Swift's influence at the court of Queen Anne. In January of 1712, the same month that the Duke of Marlborough was removed from all his offices, Hunter had been promoted from colonel to brigadier general. The accession of George I, however, set off a new round of attacks on Hunter, of much the same sort as were aimed at Spotswood. Hunter was not reappointed governor until January 1715, and Cornbury's ally, Nicholson, waited in Boston until March for word he might be named to replace Swift's friend. As in Virginia, the New York Assembly of 1715 proved more obstructive than usual under the influence of the powerful New York merchants, Jacobus Van Cortlandt and Stephen Delancey, whose descendants joined the British against the American Revolution. Governor Hunter combated his enemies in Swiftian fashion with the first play written in America, a political satire which made them the laughingstock of New York. Weaving together actual characters and events in both the New York and New Jersey assemblies, Hunter's Androboros exposed the plotters against him to devastating ridicule. The title role represented Francis Nicholson. Old Knick-Knack, who had paganized himself with that name, reports the play's court jester, Tom o' Bedlam. The name Androboros signifies a man-eater. He is now very far gone indeed. Other plotters featured in the play include Lord Oinbaros the Sot, that is, Lord Cornbury, the Speaker, New York Assembly Speaker William Nicol, the Coxcomb, that is, Daniel Cox, a New Jersey councilor who was lobbying for Hunter's removal in London, Fizzle, the Anglican minister William Vesey, an agent of Cornbury's, and Flip, Adolph Philipse, a major New York merchant, landholder, and member of the council. Hunter himself is cast as the keeper, supported by Solemn, his friend Lewis Morris. Aesop, that is, David Jamison, the Chief Justice of New Jersey, and the deputy, that is, George Clark, Secretary and Auditor of New York. The Senate in the play is waiting for Androbos to bring some mighty deliverance from the rule of their keeper. Meanwhile, they pass a resolution not to be bound by any laws, rules, or customs, any law, rule, or custom to the contrary, notwithstanding. When Solemn objects to this wild doctrine, the speaker informs him that for reasons best known to ourselves, you are expelled. Androbos is ushered in and congratulates the Senate for expelling Solemn, this wandering plague that kibes in the heels and piles in the posteriors of mankind. Androboros has been appointed a general to lead an expedition against the Canadian possessions of Francis Louis XIV. He pompously vows not to pare these nails, wash this blue visage, or put off the speckled shirt, until I have made that haughty monarch confess himself in all his projects for universal dominion, my inferior. The Senate immediately passes a resolution commending Androbos for his courage, conduct, and prudence on the expedition which has not yet begun. When he finally departs, the keeper is informed of the senator's actions. In disgust, he declares, "To your kennels, ye hounds," and dissolves the session. Fizzle, Flip, and Coxcomb then plot to have the keeper removed as governor and to reinstall Lord Oinbarrows, who has orchestrated, quote, secret representations and remonstrances against the keeper. Coxcomb demands that additional charges be faked immediately in the name of the, quote, the consistory, that is a reference to the Anglican clergy, and put in the form of an address to Lord Oinbarrows. Meanwhile, Androboros, like Nicholson in 1711, has returned without a fight from his, quote, expeditious expedition. He declares that there is no need for a conquest of Canada after all. Hunter's emphasis on the Quebec issue in Androbos underscored the importance he attached to opening the West. The Peace of Utrecht in 1713 was followed by the disintegration of Queen Anne's government and her death that following year, especially following the Jesuit Orleanist coup in France. The French and British monarchies were again allied on the issue of containing the American colonies. Hunter still chafed under the restraint, and he loathed the arrangement, which required him to treat the French foe in Canada as a peace-loving neighbor. Another of Robert Hunter's protégés in New York was James Alexander, heir to the Scottish earldom of Stirling, who was deported to America for his part in the Jacobite Rebellion of 1715. Hunter had known his family in Scotland, and the young Alexander soon became one of Hunter's most trusted friends and remained his personal agent in New York following Hunter's departure. Hunter appointed him to several offices in New York and New Jersey, and Alexander later served on the councils of both colonies as Attorney General of New Jersey. Trained in mathematics and surveying, James Alexander also became a noted astronomer and a member of Benjamin Franklin's American Philosophical Society. Much of his training in astronomy came directly from Hunter, who in 1718 led a project with Governor Keith of Pennsylvania to plot and compare the declination of the stars and planets from their respective latitudes. In 1753, working with Franklin's scientific circles, Alexander was the astronomer in charge of American preparations to record the transit of Mercury. He was also a key figure in Franklin's Republican networks and helped him organize support for the Albany Plan of Union, Franklin's nation-building scheme of 1754. His son, William Alexander, served in the French and Indian War and became a general in the Continental Army early in the Revolution. In 1778, he helped to expose the Conway cabal's plot against General George Washington. The list could go on. That Hunter had touched many lives for the better was evident in an address of thanks passed by the New York Assembly before he sailed. "You have governed well and wisely, like a prudent magistrate, like an affectionate parent. We have seen many governors, and may see more, and as none of those have had the honor to serve in your station were ever so justly fixed in the affections of the government, so those to come will acquire no mean reputation when it can be truly said of them, their conduct hath been like yours. We thankfully accept the honor you do us in calling yourself our countryman. Give us leave, then, to desire you will not forget this is your country, and if you can, make haste to return to it." Governor Keith made a special trip to New York for a final discussion of strategy. Then, on July 13, 1719, Hunter turned the governments of New York and New Jersey over to their respective council presidents, Peter Schuyler and Lewis Morris, and boarded HMS Pearl for England. Well, that's the end of chapter 9 of How the Nation Was Won. And although I usually read more towards an hour every night, I think I'm going to stop pretty around here, about half an hour or so into the book. Um, if ginger beer is a copyright, would ginger flip do? Four Rain buys the Q ginger beer because it is less sweet and I think no citric acid. One thing about the Q though, that if you read the label, it has some has a little bit of pepper in it, like chili pepper in it. And so it's got a little bit more of a tang to it than most ginger beer does. I like it. I don't object to it, but my favorite still is Belvoir Farms from I think it's Lancashire in Great Britain. So, but tonight we're drinking from Prince of Peace, the honey crystals, and I put them in a very small cup here, so it's very concentrated and good for the throat. Yeah, yeah, you have to read the label. You never know these things. But I finally figured out that Reed's is not worth it anymore. It tastes like pineapple now because you notice this number one ingredient is pineapple juice. It's not a ginger flavor, and that's what was wrong with it. Now it is a little cheaper than your regular brands of ginger beer, but I'm sorry, I have to give it a fail. I used to buy it, but Reed's, no, can't do it. Willie Fix It, happy Easter to you, my friend, and happy Easter to everyone. Happy spring. Um, I hope you'll forgive me, but I think I'm just going to let myself call it a night a little early tonight. And looking forward to tomorrow night, Wednesday evening, where we have an interview. This will be our second interview with Amber Connor of Atlanta, Georgia. We'll talk about Georgia politics. We'll talk about the voting situation. We will talk about her personal adventures in asserting the rights of citizens and how things are going with her family and everything. It's a remarkable story of success in America right now. I am looking forward to it immensely. I think a lot of people got a real sense of uh, of goodness and feeling good about America just from talking to Amber Connor for an hour. So let's do that together tomorrow night right here at McDuff Lives, and we'll see you then. Good night, everybody.